Hello and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you for listening to us today. How you doing today, Sarah?
I'm doing all right. I am trying out a new recipe from the Lord of the Rings inspired cookbook I have for pickled peaches.
Neat.
Yeah. Apparently they go really good with like different kinds of cheeses and like meats and stuff. So I'm thinking that like this is a perfect excuse for putting together a charcuterie board.
Got it. Well, we are recording this just before Canadian Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So we've got a family dinner coming up, and it's a busy weekend and just a lot going on. Because it's October, we always have a lot going on this time of year.
What are you thankful for?
What am I thankful for? I'm thankful that we survived COVID.
Yes.
I'm thankful for all the people in my life. I think if I could have one wish, it would be for all the people in my life to know just how much I love them and how important they are to me.
Oh.
And
you can just tell them, right?
I do, but do they believe me?
I believe you.
Good. And of course, as always, I'm very thankful for our listeners who are always really supportive and awesome.
Yes. I couldn't have said it better myself for what I am also thankful for this year. And I hope that whether you're Canadian or not, you are having a good weekend and take some time to feel thankful for the things you have in your life.
Today, I am thankful for listener James Vicari, who is the reason we're watching the movie we're watching today.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. We really appreciate you reaching out.
So, to give the backstory, we are watching some Japanese horror movies, and last week's episode, I originally planned to be covering a movie called KAIDAN KAGAMI-GA-FUCHI from 1959, directed by Masaki Mori. Ghost of Kagami Pond is how this is normally translated. Very similar title to KAIDAN KASANE-GA-FUCHI, which is Ghost of Kasane Swamp, but a different movie. I ended up not being able to find a copy because the copy on YouTube that we were going to watch got taken down before we could do the episode. I reached out to our listeners, said like, hey, if anyone knows how I can get a copy of this, please let me know. We watched Invisible Invaders to kind of give us some buffer time. And then it didn't work out. And last week's episode we did on Yotsuya Kaiden from 1959, which was going to be the next movie. So of course, with that episode in the can, listener James Vicari came out of the woodwork to provide us with a copy of KAIDAN KAGAMI-GA-FUCHI, which we'd been looking for. So we're going to cover that movie this week.
And you were saying it came out the same day.
Came out the same day. They both came out July 1st. So we're like pretty justified in handling it whatever way we wanted.
Yeah, so we're still chronological order.
Exactly.
We're all good.
Yeah. I originally thought I'd do this before Yotsuya Kaiden because right after, like, next week's movie is going to be Tokaido Yotsuya Kaiden. And I figured having those two next to each other would allow us to, like, really, get in deep on comparing, contrasting. But this way also works because now we have a break between our two different Yotsuya Kaidens with this other Kaiden. So this is a film from Shin Toho Studios, which is the same studio that backed director Masaki Mori's version of Yotsuya Kaiden in 1956.
Yeah, if folks are curious to know more about that movie, you can head over to episode 191 and take a listen. It's also currently ranked at number 152.
And Shin Toho's also been the studio that's been cranking out these Nobuo Nakagawa horror movies. They're also going to be the studio behind Nobuo Nakagawa's upcoming 1959 Tokaido Yotsuya Kaiden. So Masaki Mori, who directed the 56 Yotsuya Kaiden and is directing this movie, you can learn more about him in that previous episode that Sarah just mentioned. But he's been cranking out lots of movies in the 3 years in between. Very much a like journeyman workers director at Shintoho during a period when that studio was just cranking out B movies to compete with the other Japanese studios of the time.
Yeah, speaking of like competing, so we did talk about how next week's movie, Tokaido Yatsuya Kaiden, would have been like them trying to capitalize on Yatsuya Kaiden. Would Kaidan Kagami-Ga-FUCHI be trying to capitalize on Yatsuya Kaiden at all because they are both ghost stories and horror movies?
What we're seeing here in the late 1950s in Japan is kind of just like a real resurgence of these like ghost story movies. We've got these versions of Yatsuya Kaiden. We've got all these other kind of Kaidens. We've got a lot of ghost cat movies that came out in the 50s. We covered Black Cat Mansion on the show a few episodes ago. And in that episode, we mentioned that like there were a ton of these ghost cat movies coming out, but we haven't been able to like track them down. So we're not going to watch movies we can't find, right? But there was a lot of this stuff. Basically because of a need for like cheap B movies on familiar themes. But then of course also like the Hammer movies like Horror of Dracula coming out in Japan and being big hits. What I found very interesting about this movie when I looked into it is it is based on a story by a writer named Encho Sanutei, who also wrote the play that Kaidan Kasame-Ga-FUCHI was based on.
Oh.
And if you go back to our episode on Kaidan Kasame-Ga-FUCHI, episode 214B, we talk a bit more about Encho Sanutei in that episode. He was a Meiji period author who cranked out like a ton of popular ghost stories, plays, novels, what have you.
Yeah, he, if I remember correctly, he was like, stuff that's popular, yeah, I want to do that because I want money.
Yeah, I think his most famous work is Kaiden Botan Doro, which is The Ghost of the Haunted Lantern, which has been made into a movie a bunch of times as well. So yeah, this is from the same author as Kasane-Ga-FUCHI. So we're definitely seeing like formulaic works.
Yeah.
Like this is like if you were going like, oh man, this like Transmorphers movie really seems like a cheap ripoff of Transformers. And then you found out it was also Michael Bay. And you're like, wait. But yeah, so I sort of talked about this movie a little bit last week when I thought we weren't going to be able to watch it, but it hits a lot of the standard formulaic tropes for this kind of story. So I guess we'll be comparing it pretty directly with kind of the bigger budget, more prestige Yatsuya Kaiden that we watched last week, as well as the cheaper B movie Yatsuya Kaiden we'll be watching next week. Both of those movies were in color. This is a black and white movie. This is a tier down on the production quality scale. But yeah, thank you so much to James Vicari for providing us with a English subtitled copy that we could watch.
Listeners, if you want to watch along, hopefully you have a James Vicari in your life who can send you a copy. Otherwise, I guess you're out of luck. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss Kaidan Kagami-Ga-FUCHI from 1959, directed by Masaki Mori.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Kaidan Kagami-Ga-FUCHI from 1959, directed by Masaki Mori. Ben, what did you think?
This was a movie.
Why do you say it like that?
It lasted 60 minutes. It took up time. Things happened in it.
It was on film.
Yes.
I thought this was all right. You know, it was fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think fine sums up my feelings for it as well.
Okay. That makes it sound like we really didn't like it, though.
Stuff just keeps happening
Yeah.
in this movie. It's very much like an and then story.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about I go through the plot synopsis? And I'll try to avoid and thens.
All right, we'll see how you do.
So we mainly follow this one fabric shop that I'm sure has a name, but
Ijimaya.
But they kept calling it like the Ijimaya.
Yeah.
Like, so that it's like the fabric shop.
Yeah.
Okay. It is run by a guy named Yaemin, which bodes well, right? And his wife. It is managed by a guy named Kinbei. And they also have a new guy working here. His name is Yasujiro. Now, Yasujiro is like doing a stand-up job, and Yaemin's wife, whose name I didn't catch, convinces Yaemin to adopt Yasujiro into the family. Around the same time as this, Yasujiro runs into his old childhood friend Okiku, meeting again in Edo. She is here shopping with her friend Osato and Osato's mother for Osato's wedding, basically looking for a wedding kimono. And Yasujiro's like, oh, well, like, I work at a fabric shop. Come stop by. Kinbei ends up selling them some fabric for the wedding kimono. Turns out that it's, like, not the best quality, though. We do see someone come by into the shop to be like, this is shoddy merchandise. And at first you think she's just going to be like Karen. But no, she's fully in her right as a consumer to be like, this shit's terrible. Now, Kinbei overhears Yaemin and his wife discussing, adopting Yasujiro with the hopes that, like, Yasujiro will then marry Okiku and then, like, the store will be run by this, like, married couple. And Kinbei's like, I've been managing here for 10 years and they're just going to cut me out. So he wants to kind of sabotage Yasujiro and his prospects at the shop. So one night, Kinbei goes and he robs Yasujiro when he's returning back with like 15 ryo.
Which is enough to feed a person for 2 years.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. That same night is also Osato's wedding, and her kimono tears during the like reception because it's bad fabric. And the family that she's marrying into is so offended that they call off the wedding and they don't want anything to do with her. So near all of this, and we pass by it a few times, is Kagami Pond. And so Osato, in her wedding gown, goes and she's planning to drown herself in this pond when Kinbei comes by, having just robbed Yasujiro, and she's like, it's all your fault, so now I'm going to kill you with this butcher knife it turns out I have. They struggle, and Kinbei actually ends up killing Osato, and then he dumps her body into the pond. Now, Yasujiro is on the hook for this 15 ryo, and so his dad is like, okay, well, I'll give them the family sword. That has to be worth at least 15 ryo. So Yasujiro's dad is like coming over with the sword, and Kinbei knows about this, and he attacks Yasujiro's dad and steals the sword, and dumps the body into the pond. To further kind of muck up Yasujiro's prospects at the family establishment, Kinbei gets his girlfriend Onaka in to serve as a maid, and she gets close to Yaemin. Now, Yaemin shows himself to not be the most stand-up person because at one point, Okiku's trying to be like a good daughter-in-law, and he tries to rape her. She gets away thanks to a haunting, but but Onaka basically says, no, I'll bone down with you as the maid. When Yaemin's wife confronts Onaka, they have a struggle and Onaka pushes the wife down the well, and Onaka becomes the new wife. If that's how marriage works, man, we're never getting a maid. That was a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you didn't laugh, so. Okay, so with Onaka as the new wife, she convinces Yaemin that Okiku and Yasujiro need to divorce because she starts this rumor that Okiku's carrying on with some other dude in the village. So Yaemin is like, you guys need to divorce. Okiku doesn't fight against it because she thinks it's because she didn't sleep with him. Now, Okiku's kind of like out on the street, and Kinbei's like, no, don't worry, you can come work at my friend's tea house, don't worry, he's my friend, so he won't attack you. Turns out Kinbei actually just like sells her to the tea house owner for 15 ryo. Now, Kinbei is off to go travel for work to like sell stuff in like another town. So he heads out and he gets lost in the mountains because he is continually haunted by Osato. So he takes refuge in this nearby mountain hut. Turns out the person living here is Osato's mom. She goes to try to kill him, and he ends up pushing her into the fire face first. Now we see that Okiku gives birth to a little boy. The tea house owner's pissed because, she got here when she was pregnant. He had no idea and didn't get any work out of her. So he goes to tell Yasujiro what's happened, to basically be like, pay me money to get your wife and kid back. And in doing that, Yasujiro learns that Kinbei is behind like all of his recent troubles. So he goes to confront Kinbei at the same time that Kinbei, Onaka, and Yaemin are like poisoning and killing a shop owner that for reasons that are like way too complicated.
The shop owner owes Yaemin money, and Yaemin was really hoping the shop owner wouldn't be able to pay up, but he could. So rather than take his money back, he kills him because if
he wanted the shop.
Yeah, which was the collateral. So yeah, these are all terrible people.
Yeah, all terrible people. So Yasujiro walks in and the store owner is like dead on the floor. So Kinbei's like, well, no witnesses, and goes to use the sword that he stole from Yasujiro's dad. And Yasujiro's like, you killed my dad too? What the fuck? So before Kinbei is able to like go and attack Yasujiro, the haunting fully ramps up. Ramp is an odd word to actually use, but I will get into that in the discussion. So throughout all of this, Osato has been haunting Kinbei, also a little bit of haunting on Onaka. There's been some haunting on Yaemin, and it's mainly been focused on Osato. But at this climax, Osato, the wife, and Yasujiro's dad all start haunting Kinbei specifically.
Osato's mom shows up. Everybody who got killed starts haunting. And in this haunting, Kinbei ends up killing Onaka and Yaemin through the classic, like, ghost is there, he attacks, and suddenly it's a person. And in this haunting, Kinbei ends up going mad a little bit, and he's a little bit in a stupor. And so he's walking around, he ends up walking by Kagami Pond, and he is inundated with the voices of the dead echoing all around him. And so he ends up walking into the pond. And then we see that Yasujiro and Okiku are reunited with her son, and all is well for them. The end. The end.
So the reason why I was like, I don't know if ramping up to this climax is the right word, because while I like that the haunting begins right away, it's focused with Osato going after Kinbei and kind of like anyone who works at the shop, but it's like too much too soon, and there's no ramping up after that, really.
Well, the problem is that this is the least effective haunting of all time.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so, as you say, we get the ghost like 15 minutes into this movie. The movie's an hour long. Osato dies. She starts haunting Kinbei. And the way that the hauntings like work is, the story's going along, and then every once in a while, Osato will show up and be like, Kinbei, how could you do this to me? Shlup, shlup, shlup. And
that's the sound of her water-soaked kimono.
Yes. And occasionally, like, it'll be Yaemin's wife haunting Onaka, like, Onaka, how could you do this to me? And these ghosts show up, people scream and freak out, and then they just go back to doing what they're doing.
Yeah, they cut to them continuing to be shitty people.
Right. And so despite like haunting after haunting, the bad guys keep doing bad things as if the hauntings aren't happening. So like you could cut all of the haunting scenes until the ending out of the movie and they wouldn't make any kind of difference. Like nobody's behavior, no elements of the story are being changed by these hauntings occurring, which is not good.
Yeah.
Like structurally speaking for the telling of a story.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I think that they ramped things up too early, or like showed too much too early. Because if the haunting had been like spooky slurpy sounds or spooky like happenings where you can't really explain, but it's not quite enough for people to go like jumping up and screaming, that would make the structure kind of make sense for why they're continuing to be shitty people. But if you have someone coming to you who you've killed, and their spirit coming to you saying like, why did you do this to me? You'd think that there would be more change to their behavior.
Yeah, this is sort of the opposite of the problem that you had with Kenji Misumi's Yotsuya Kaiden, where you really didn't like how long it took that movie to get to the horror part, because it spends like 65% of its runtime setting up all of the melodrama. Here we have like an intercutting of the melodrama and the horror, where we're getting horror throughout, and it's like, see, like, here's all your ghost stuff that you wanted. But it's not good if those things are so disconnected as they are in this movie.
I will say my favorite sequence for the haunting is when Kinbei is at Osato's mom's hut, because it felt very like nightmarish. He goes in because he's been like followed by Osato's ghost through the mountains, and he slowly realizes that that's Osato's mom, and Osato's mom slowly realizes that that's the clerk that sold him the shitty kimono, and it comes to like a head with like him thinking that she and Osato's ghost are attacking him, but then he wakes up having slept the night at the hut and overhears Osato's mom like cursing the store, and it's like really confusing in a good way of like, well, what is real? Like, what actually happened when he arrived before he actually went to sleep? And it just felt very like effective, but then the movie keeps going after that.
Yeah, I think there's some fun details and moments here and there. Like, I really like the wet trails that the ghosts leave behind because they were like dumped in a pond. Little things like that are really nice, but I think the direction in this movie is, for the most part, really boring.
I think it is effectively moody.
Yes, there's moodiness, but like so often things are framed as just like, here's a medium wide shot with the characters kind of tussling in front of the camera for a while. Like, this movie's just kind of a way to kill an hour and not a lot more. Like,
to be fair, that's all they kind of wanted it to be.
Yes, but the characters are just also very one note.
Yeah.
Like, Kinbei is just kind of an evil jerk. And
it was like, why are you killing Yasujiro's dad? Like, wouldn't they know that you're the one walking with him?
Why are you doing so much of this? Like, the whole thing is like, Kinbei's been the manager there for so long, and they're passing over him to give the shop to Yasujiro because Yasujiro's getting married, and the shop owner and his wife want the shop to go to a married couple. So then Kinbei goes to complain about this to his girlfriend, who he's told, I'm not going to marry you until I inherit the shop.
That's just because he wanted to get with her.
Yeah. No, I get that he's an asshole,
a shitty dude.
and that was never like his intent was never to marry her. But it's still weird because it's like, well, then if the thing holding you back from getting the shop is that they want a married couple to do it, just tell them that you're going to marry Onaka. Like, he's just a jerk. And then like Yasujiro is just like this like guileless good guy who has really no personality trait other than like innocence.
And so many people are just unreasonable. Like, maybe there's something with like a lack of cultural context, but Osato's like bridegroom's family being like, your kimono tore, how dare you?
Yeah. The thing to understand with the kimono thing, not that this like justifies this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
But like, the idea is that the bridegroom's family gave Osato's mother the money to buy the kimono, and it's a cheap kimono, so they think that she swindled them, right?
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Like, could also just like hear out what happened.
They're total assholes for sure. The most reasonable character in this movie is like the brothel owner somehow, because like,
well, he's still shitty.
He's shitty, sure, but like, you know, he comes to Yasujiro and he's like, hey man, like, listen.
And he also calls Kinbei on his shit.
Yeah, he's like, Kinbei, you're a terrible person. But then, yeah, he goes to Yasujiro and he's like, listen, like, your wife is at my tea house and I can't use her because she's pregnant and she just had a kid and stuff. So, like, give me the money that I paid for her and you can have her back. And Yasujiro's like, well, can I at least, like, see her? And he's like, no, you can give me the money first. Like, bad person, but, like, okay, at least I understand where you're coming from.
He's just a
capitalist.
He's just a capitalist.
But, like, what I mean by pointing this out is that there's none of the depth to these characters that the versions...
Well, it's a pond.
Right. How do all these people keep drowning in it? There's none of the depth to these characters that the versions of Yatsuya Kaiden try to give their characters. Like, even Masaki Mori's version of Yatsuya Kaiden, the characters had more depth than this. And I don't know if that's just an advantage of the fact that Yatsuya Kaiden's such a well-known story that we're starting with, like, a base level knowledge about the characters. So anything the movie adds on to that base level of knowledge feels like depth. But this is based on a novel or a play or something from the same writer who did Kaidan Kasani-ga-Fuchi, which was very similar kind of story. But Kaidan Kasani-ga-Fuchi by Nobuo Nakagawa was much better than this. And it still followed these very formulaic beats that this movie follows, but the characters had more depth. The story had more going on. That was another movie where we found that, like, it was very soap opera melodrama for like half the movie. And we were like, is this really horror or not? And then it ramped up the horror at the end. So I think that's just kind of the standard structure to these Kaiden films. And this desire that we've had for, like, some of that haunting stuff to come in earlier, this movie satisfies that, but it also shows us why that doesn't really work, because it makes all the characters look like idiots.
Yeah. Well, I don't really have much else to say about this movie. Okay, cool. Let's move on to ranking.
Okay.
So, Ben, to your point, Kaidan Kasani-ga-Fuchi from Nobuo Nakagawa, you mentioned before we covered it in episode 214B. It is currently ranked at number 73. And then the last thing we saw from this director was the 1956 Yatsuya Kaiden. That is currently ranked at number 152. When I was looking at ranking, I started, like, I looked at those two, and I agree that Kasane-ga-Fuchi is better than this one. Thinking about this director's Yatsuya Kaiden, I felt that he did better at Yatsuya Kaiden. Maybe it's because, you know, tried and true formula. They weren't trying to do kind of something new. Like, they knew what they wanted to do with adapting something that's been adapted several times. So looking below the 56 Yatsuya Kaiden, we have things like Lady and the Monster, Invisible Man's Revenge, The Climax, Voodoo Man, and then we get down to 158, The Return of Dr. X. Kaidan Kagami-ga-Fuchi is more of a horror movie than The Return of Dr. X. Sorry, Humphrey Bogart. So my range is quite small. It's 152 to 156, with my floor being Voodoo Man.
Okay. I'm looking below you.
Okay.
And that's because below Return of Dr. X, we have stuff like Mystery of the Wax Museum, The Mummy, Genuina.
This is much more of a horror movie than those, even though the structure has problems like what we see with The Devil Doll.
I think that these are better movies than Kaidan Kagami-ga-Fuchi. The problem I have with Kaidan Kagami-ga-Fuchi is that, like, it's so very paint by numbers.
Sure.
And there's just, watching it was just like, and then this next thing happens.
Which I did avoid in the plot summary. Yes. I didn't go and then. So
I found myself a little spot, which was about 50 places lower than you. So I looked all the way down to Song at Midnight, which is at 205. Below Song at Midnight is Bride of the Gorilla, which has Raymond Burr. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed Bride of the Gorilla, which is a terrible movie, more than I enjoyed Kaidan Kagami-ga-Fuchi, because Bride of the Gorilla is, like, weirdly taboo in its, like...
Yeah, it's still, like, paint by numbers in terms of its structure, but what it's talking about feels taboo.
Yeah. Below Bride of the Gorilla, however, is Jungle Captive, which is one of those Paula Dupree movies
Yeah.
So I picked out 207 as my spot for this, below Bride of the Gorilla and above Jungle Captive.
I feel like that's actually a fairly good spot. Like between our ranges is around like in the 180s, where we have some movies that, you know, struggled with structure for different reasons, like Beast with a Million Eyes, The She Creature, even like Giant from the Unknown. But I think it's really interesting what you've touched on here about lacking taboo-ness.
Yeah, this is an extremely safe movie.
Yeah, to the point where, like, I think for its cultural context of the kimono ripping and people being kind of unreasonable, like, that in that cultural context, sure, maybe that would seem like a reasonable thing, but it's also so, like, in the broader scope of what else happens, like, that's what's going to drive someone to be like, no, you're not part of my family anymore.
Well, yeah, and then, like, you know, all of the crimes here are so petty.
Yeah.
All of the, like, emotions here are so petty.
And while I do love hearing about petty shit and being a little petty, like, maybe not the best thing to have a horror movie around.
Yeah, and, you know, even, like, Osato's ghost appearance, like, there's the uniqueness of her being, like, dripping wet all the time, but then she also gets, like, a forehead injury up above her eye to give her, like, an oiwa look, you know? It's very derivative.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm good with your spot.
Okay, so then entering the list at the new number 207, below Bride of the Gorilla, above Jungle Captive, is KAIDAN KAGAMI-GA-FUCHI from 1959, directed by Masaki Mori.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the many episodes we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, you can drop us a line through our Ask Box on Tumblr. You can reach out over email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com or over Twitter @_screamscene.
Scream Scene updates every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify. You can listen to us however you like by subscribing to our RSS feed, and you can help the show out by leaving us a rating and a review, telling a friend about the show, or heading over to our Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons help us out with paying our hosting fees, taking the time out to research and record these episodes. Your financial contributions really mean a lot to us, and if you're at the $5 or $10 levels, you also get access to regular bonus content. Patrons of all levels get to vote in our monthly horror-adjacent bonus episode polls, the winner of which for October...
Oh, we talked about this. It's The Adventures of Ichabod Crane and Mr. Toad.
Right, yes.
And we'll be having the next poll for November's bonus episode up now.
Yeah.
And you can vote for that as well.
Yeah, so watch out for that bonus episode that'll be coming out. And of course, in October, there's always all kinds of extra bonus content. Do you want to tease what you're doing this year, Sarah?
So I will be doing another audiobook adaptation of a short story that is quite spooky, if I do say so myself. And then we're also going to be doing a sort of bonus episode.
Yes.
That's like a Patreon exclusive. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, so check out our Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast for all of that.
Now, we've kind of mentioned it already, but what are we watching next week?
Yeah, so our next episode is going to be on Tokaido Yatsuya Kaiden from 1959, directed by Nobuo Nakagawa.
Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.